Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Two Guys and a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And as you can probably see, tonight it is one guy and a Bible, and that one guy is me. William is on his way to Ghana, where he is doing some absolutely incredible work. Uh, what William is doing over there, ladies and gentlemen, you really need to ask him to do some investigation about all of the wonderful things that William is doing over there. I mean, it truly is astounding. He is laying the foundation for long-term, multi-generational establishment and growth of Christianity and covenant eschatology. He has some wonderful people that he's working with. Solomon Baidu is one of those men over there, very faithful, very sound man. And so William is, I don't know how many times William has been over there so far, but I do know that he's every time he goes back, his plate is full with things that he's supposed to do, missionary type of work, teaching work, preaching work, debating, and what have you. And so it's always a very, very fruitful time for him. He will be over there for a little over, if I'm not mistaken, he'll be over there this time for a little bit over 2 weeks. And his plate, as I mentioned, is absolutely chock full. So tonight it's me. Now I'll be contacting Daniel Rogers, who of course filled in for William a good little while. And I'll be contacting Daniel about being on the program again next week to be filling in William's spot. And look forward to having Daniel back. He's always got good insights. Very, very talented young guy. And so again, very, very much look forward to having him back on the program. So I'm going to continue tonight with our investigation of the book of Ephesians and the Messianic temple. Now, William and I have covered a lot of territory, a lot of background information, a lot of preliminary information that helps us when we approach the book of Ephesians. And a lot of people, I have to tell you this, and this is very true of me in my younger years. I did not look upon the book of Ephesians as a book that had an awful lot in it about the temple. Well, the more that I've studied down through the years, the more I've come to realize how much temple imagery, temple language is found in the book of Ephesians. Now, keep in mind that the word temple carries with it the idea of fellowship. And it was a fellowship between heaven and earth. And thus, when we start the book out in Ephesians chapter 1, 10 and following, that it was God's eternal purpose before the foundation of the world, that in the stewardship of the fullness of time, he would gather together in one body all things which are in heaven and that are on earth. What is that? That's fellowship. And as we pointed out, as William and I did in our discussion, that's the restoration of the fellowship between heaven and earth that was lost through sin, Adam and Eve. Okay? Well, the Garden of Eden was itself the most holy place. It was the place of fellowship. So when Paul in Ephesians chapter 1 discusses how it was God's eternal purpose that in Christ he would reconcile, bring about fellowship, all things that are in heaven and that are on earth, he's talking temple imagery. Because even when it was tabernacle in the wilderness, when it then morphed into the temple, that's where the Jews from all over the world, they would come physically to visit Jerusalem, to visit the temple, and they did so to manifest, to express, to participate in the fellowship between God and Israel that temple symbolized. And so we never want to lose sight of the fact that temple represented fellowship. And when we come to the book of Ephesians, it's saturated with the concept of fellowship. Now, I want to move on from that, but I'm filming this, of course, on Tuesday. Over in the land of Israel, it's the time of the Passover, one of the great feasts of Israel. Okay. I'm pretty sure you're aware, if you're not, you should have been, that efforts have been being made to restore the red heifer sacrifice. Now, when you go back into the book of Numbers, Numbers chapter 19, you have the mandate, the law concerning the red heifer sacrifice. Very simply stated, very succinctly stated, the ashes of a red heifer. Now, the red heifer, a little bit of background here, may take just a tad longer than I intended, but the red heifer sacrifice had to be a heifer, couldn't be over 3 years old, according to the rabbis, according to tradition, and it could not have any blemishes. It had to be perfect in regard to its color, totally red. Couldn't be any white splotches here and there. It had to be totally red. I remember going back all the way into the 60s when I was a young man. I remember how the news, Newsweek and Time and different magazines and different newspapers were carrying stories about how farmers in Texas had been working on developing a pure red species, if I may use that word, or breed of red cattle. They believed that they had bred some pure red heifers. So, boy, they ship them off to Jerusalem. Because after all, preparations were being made. Now, this is in the 60s, folks. Remember, preparations were being made to rebuild the temple. I remember reading articles back then. There were train loads of building materials just waiting for the building of the temple. Never mind that the Muslim mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, still sits there. It was sitting there in the 60s. It's still sitting there now. Nothing has changed. They haven't laid a brick. They haven't set a stone. I saw a YouTube video just the other day that said the construction of the third temple is already underway, but they're keeping it under wraps. Ladies and gentlemen, do you think that the Muslims would allow for even one moment that they would allow one single stone, and especially not a cornerstone, of a Jewish temple to be laid on the Jewish mountain or on that Zion mountain? Do you think they'd allow that? Now, look, I know, I understand. According to some sources, and you can just Google this, it's easy to find. I did it many times. There are, generally speaking, about 10 efforts, some of them violent, made every year to defile the Al-Aqsa Mosque for the purpose, literally, to bring in World War III so that Israel could destroy the Muslim nations, tear down the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and build the Jerusalem temple. Listen, folks, you got to understand how dangerous a belief in a coming third temple truly is. Some former generals in the Israeli army are openly on the record saying, we cannot wait for World War III so that we can obliterate the Muslims and build the Jewish temple in its sanctified position. You think that's not dangerous? You think that's not something that we ought to be concerned about? Bad theology leads to bloodshed. That's one of the reasons why William and Daniel and I and countless other full preterists believe so fervently that it is critically important that we share the word that the Israel that is in that land today is not biblical, Torah-based Israel. They are not descended from Abraham. They're Ashkenazi. They're Khazaris. They are not. There is no nation of a homogeneous bloodline descended from Abraham. All you got to do is look this up on the internet, ladies and gentlemen. It's just there. If you don't believe me, get a copy of my book, Israel 1948, Countdown to Nowhere, in which I document from encyclopedias, dictionaries, anthropologists, historians, all of whom cannot be accused of being anti-Semitic. They're scientists. And they all testify there is no such thing as a nation descended from Abraham living in Israel today. They don't even exist as a nation today. And listen, if, and I'll use that word, but if that statement is true, then it's factual. It's not anti-Semitic at all. It's factual. People may not like it, but it's not anti-Semitic. Okay, so we have all of these efforts to rebuild a third temple. And we are told, oh, you know what? We've got to have the offering of the ashes of a red heifer. So going back to Numbers chapter 19, there have only been, up to the time of Jesus, throughout 1,500 years of Jewish history, there had only been 9 qualified, certified, true blue, red heifers. That shows you how rare they were. Now, what's interesting is Jesus is set forth as the antitype of the red heifer, a contrast to the red heifer, if you please, in Hebrews chapter 9. For if the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctifies to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Jesus Christ, who offered himself without spot, without blemish, you see, that's a direct reference to the red heifer that had to be without spot, without blemish. But how much more shall the blood of Jesus Christ, who offered himself without spot, without blemish unto God, purge your conscience from dead works, so that you may serve the living God. So guess what? Here we have, in the entire history of Israel, 9 red heifers. Jesus is being set forth as the 10th. And by the way, the rabbis always said, there will only be 10. There will not be more than that. And here's the author of Hebrews setting forth Jesus as that final purification red heifer sacrifice. I know he's not a female, and that's where that typology can be broken down, but the application is still valid. He is set forth as the fulfillment of that 10th red heifer, without spot and without blemish. Okay, so I'm saying all of that to say this. You're probably aware of the fact that just recently, 5 red heifers were sent from Texas over to Jerusalem. When they were shipped, they looked good. Okay? They looked pretty good. I've seen pictures of them. Now, photographs don't really tell the tale, of course, but nonetheless, pictures of these 5 red heifers looked pretty good. Well, over a passing of a couple of different months, guess what? 2 of them were decertified. They were cast out. They were not pure red heifers. So that left 3 of them. But there's another problem. They were getting too old. Nonetheless, there were all sorts of reports coming out of both Israel and coming out of Zionist sources that said, now they like to hedge their bet, They like to say, well, it could be, it might be, it should be. But reports were running rampant for a little while that on this Passover, now again, I'm filming this on Tuesday, all right? And it's April the 23rd, 2024. So as I filmed this, last night was the Passover. Reports were running rampant for a good little while that this pure red heifer sacrifice was going to be offered last night. And that offering of that red heifer to bring about the ashes of the red heifer were supposed to initiate a long series of last days events, including the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, including the rebuilding of the Jerusalem temple. Now, I've got to digress here for just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. In the Zionist / dispensational view of the temple, the very next temple, it's not the third temple at all. Well, it would be, I suppose, but it's not the desired messianic temple. No, no, no. In the dispensational paradigm, and you have to catch the power of what I'm about to say here. In the dispensational paradigm, the next temple to be rebuilt is what I call the man of sin temple. And here's what I mean by that. Immediately after the rapture, the man of sin appears on the scene, and he manages to sign a peace treaty with Israel and the Muslim nations to allow Israel to rebuild a temple. So again, you've got to catch the power of this. The very next temple in the dispensational worldview is the man of sin temple that will only come about, pardon me, through the efforts of the man of sin. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. If I am an impartial, and obviously I'm not totally impartial, but if I am sort of kind of an impartial observer, and all of a sudden millions, hundreds of millions of believers in Christ instantly disappear off the face of the earth, nobody knows where any of them went. And all of a sudden, a guy jumps up and says he's going to make a peace treaty with Israel and the Muslim nations. Then, wow, bad days are ahead. Do you think that I would, for even one moment, if that scenario were to play out, the disappearance of hundreds of millions of believers in Jesus, the arrival of a man of sin who convinces the Muslims to allow the Jews to tear down the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Really? Boy, you talk about some power persuasion. And all you see lying in the background here is the offering of the red heifer sacrifice, which ostensibly was supposed to take place last night. But it didn't. And you know what? I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say at the very next Passover, a year from now, the red heifer sacrifice will not be offered. But I'll add a little caveat to that. Even if, and that is an if with letters this tall, okay? Maybe that tall. Even if they were to find a pure red heifer and offer it, it would prove nothing whatsoever in regard to the fulfillment of prophecy. And you may be sitting there going, what in the world are you talking about, Preston? After all, if they find a red heifer and they offer it as a sacrifice, let's back up here. Who's going to offer it? And you say, well, the priests are. Oh, wait a minute. What priests? Let me ask you a question. Where are the genealogically verified Levitical priests? Where are they? Now, I've pointed this out before, and it's really, really important. I have people tell me all the time, well, they don't have the genealogies anymore, but God knows DNA. Are we seriously supposed to think that embedded within the biblical scripts, there is somehow, some way, the prediction that DNA is going to find the Levitical priest to offer the red heifer sacrifice? Do we honestly believe that? Well, unfortunately, some people do believe that. And I mean no disrespect. But folks, if you're going to make a claim like that, you ought to have some biblical evidence for that. And there is absolutely zero evidence. I have mentioned many times, I mentioned it on program last week. I have a good friend in Israel. He has two sons, both of them very prominent rabbis in Israel. He and I have conversed about the priesthood. And I have asked him, how would anybody go about demonstrating, proving, validating that they are of the Levitical priesthood and could even conceivably serve as a priest in a rebuilt Jerusalem temple? His answer was stunning. He said, well, we don't have the genealogies to prove that they would be of the Levitical priesthood. By the way, he never said one word about DNA. Not one word. So he said, basically what we do is, if a man claims to be of the Levitical priesthood, we just take his word for it. Wow. So here could be a guy from the tribe of Issachar, who knows, of Zebulon, Manasseh, Ephraim, who knows, no way to know. But he decides, hey, I want to be a priest. So I'm going to claim to be of the tribe of Levi, a descendant of Aaron. Oh, well, okay, come on in. We'll train you. Folks, that violates every single thing that the Bible has to say about priesthood. All right? In Ezra chapter 2, as the children of Israel, mostly the Judites, have come back out of Babylonian captivity, there's a small smattering of those from the Assyrian captivity, because after all, the Babylonians destroyed the Assyrians. Therefore, the 10 northern tribes, the Israelites that were in the Assyrian captivity, are now in Babylonian captivity, so they're allowed to go back home. Well, they start reestablishing the priesthood. And there were some men who desired to be priests. So in Ezra chapter 2, 62 and 63, it says, a search was made of the records. What records are those? Genealogical records. And the name of those individuals, their descendants, could not be found. Therefore, they were not permitted to be priests. And yet we're supposed to believe that here we are, 2024, someone might desire to be a priest, and simply because he says he wants to be a priest, or maybe he just says, hey, I feel like a priest today, that's supposed to be good enough. And it's not only supposed to be good enough, but it's supposed to be good enough to offer the red heifer as the supposed critical, foundational, last day sacrifice that would then allow the purification of the rest of the priesthood. By the way, you see, this gets into a circular problem. Okay, so you got a red heifer. Who's going to offer it? A priest. Oh, wait a minute. How do you know he's an anointed priest? Well, he says he is. Okay. But you don't have any ashes of a red heifer to anoint him, to purify him, so that he can then offer the red heifer sacrifice. Who's going to offer the red heifer sacrifice? You can't say, well, a priest. Because a priest, in order to offer the red heifer sacrifice, has got to be cleansed by the red heifer sacrifice. So in essence, what you've got is an unclean priest killing the sacrifice. Is he then going to dab those ashes on himself and say, well, now I'm clean, therefore the sacrifice is clean? There's a dog wagging his tail here, ladies and gentlemen. It just doesn't work. You know, it sounds strangely like Mormonism, in which Joseph established the priesthood. Well, who's the first priest? Who's the first priest? Oh, well, I'm going to say that I'm a priest, therefore I can anoint this next fella, and then he can turn around and anoint me. I'm sorry. That doesn't work. Absolutely doesn't work. Simply saying or simply believing that you might be a Levite is not sufficient grounds for anyone to offer a red heifer sacrifice. So how does that affect and impact the idea of a coming third temple? You've got to have a red heifer sacrifice in that paradigm, in that doctrine. But to have the red heifer sacrifice, to reiterate, you've got to have a certified, qualified, anointed, and cleansed high priest. But to have a certified, anointed, cleansed high priest, you got to have the red heifer. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Priesthood, certified, cleansed priesthood to offer the sacrifice, or a sacrifice that's been certified as pure, slain by an unclean, uncertified priest. Do you see the problem? Now, folks, I think all of this is necessary, as we look at the book of Ephesians and the doctrine of the Messianic temple. But we're not through here. I can't leave this subject yet because, as I've already stated, I mean, YouTube, the internet was just absolutely ablaze with the claims that we're in the last days. We're going to see the offering of the red heifer. And again, it's supposed to have been last night. Supposed to have been April 22nd. Lots and lots of claims that it was going to be. By the way, I made mention of the fact that some of the individuals who are making the claim, they started hedging their bets. They said, now, it's certainly possible that the sacrifice will not be offered for one reason or another. Wait a minute. If you've got a certified, pure red heifer, and if you ostensibly have a trained priest, and by the way, it doesn't matter how well you're trained. Training does not offer purification. Only the ashes of the red heifer could offer the purification. Are you following me here? So all of this buzz about the red heifer is all smoke. It's all dust, because here is the point that I want you to see tonight. And if you are a dispensationalist, if you are a premillennialist who believes, maybe not in the dispensational sense, but in the historic sense, you may vacillate when it comes to the doctrine of the red heifer. You may lean toward thinking and saying, well, yeah, we need that. I hope you'll give some thought to the following. And Oh, yeah, by the way, some of you are going to ask me about that. I was working on an old motorcycle motor that had been sitting for a while, and I wanted to see if it would turn. This is an air-cooled motorcycle engine that's out of the bike, and had it sitting on my bench, actually my tailgate. And so I grab here and I grab here. Well, I didn't really pay attention to where I was grabbing. I wanted to rotate it, right? Thankfully, I had on really good thick gloves. Well, I turn it. Well, it turned, and it had lots of compression. And it jammed this arm between the fan and the motor case. And it jammed this so hard that it caused a compression rupture. It looks like you took a razor blade and just sliced from here to there. I mean, just laid it open, gushing blood. And I was like, I had those gloves on, and I said to myself, okay, this can't be good. That finger of that glove was just turning red and bloody and all that kind of stuff. So, I'm wearing this bandage. I know it's a little distractive, and I apologize for that. So for those of you who are prone to ask about things like that, that's my explanation. And yeah, it hurts like crazy. I haven't had very many compression ruptures before, but boy, it's that long. It's almost around the entire circumference of my finger. Going to mess up my fingerprint. Yeah. Okay. Had to share that in case you're looking. All right. Now, for all of those who might be inclined to believe in the necessity for the red heifer, if you are a believer in Jesus, let me ask you a question. Is the law of Moses still in effect today? Now, look, I know that there's some people who call themselves Torah observant. I'm not talking about them. 99.9% of all Christians, when you ask them, is the law of Moses still fully in effect today? And even, by the way, even those who call themselves Torah observant Christians, Messianic Jews, what have you, they're not consistent, not even a little bit. I mean, they can't be. Absolutely cannot be. That's another subject for another time. But 99.9% of all Bible-believing believers in Jesus, if you ask them, is the law of Moses still fully in effect today? They said, no. The law of Moses was taken out of the way in the first century. Thomas Ice, with whom I've had 4 debates, Thomas Ice says in the book that he co-wrote with Timothy DeMille and Tim LaHaye, said the law of Moses was fully removed, taken out of the way in the first century. I do not know of any dispensationalist that disagrees with that, ladies and gentlemen. When you ask them that question, oh yeah, law of Moses taken out of the way. Okay. And yet, those very same individuals, and believe me, I've had countless conversations on this subject. When you ask, has the law of Moses been taken out of the way? They say yes. And those same individuals turn right around and they get super, super excited at the possibility of the imminent offering of a red heifer sacrifice. And you're going, so? Ladies and gentlemen, the red heifer sacrifice was mandated by, commanded by, necessary in, and exclusively in the law of Moses. Now, who took the law of Moses out of the way? Well, most people will appeal to Colossians chapter 2, 14 to 17, in which Paul said that Christ took out of the way the commandments, the handwriting of ordinances that were against us, that were contrary to us, nailing it to the cross. And they argue, oh, well, you see, what Paul's saying here is that God through Christ, nailed the law to the cross, the old covenant law. Well, unfortunately, that's not true at all for those who make that argument. The Sabbatarian folks normally say, well, what he's talking about here is he took the ceremonial laws, the bloody sacrificial laws, out of the way. But of course, they say he left the Sabbath in place. Be sure to tune in to my YouTube videos Mondays through Wednesdays as I'm talking about the feast days. And I've been discussing Colossians chapter 2, 14 to 17 a good bit. You'll need to go there, watch those videos to get caught up to speed. But here's the point. I know that Paul was not saying the ceremonial feast days had been taken out of the way, because in verse 17 he says, let no man judge you in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, which are present active, a shadow of the good things that are about to come. He did not say, the Greek is clear, the Greek is specific, the Greek is undeniable, there are no variants. He did not say, let no man judge you in respect of new moons, feast days, and Sabbaths, which were at one time shadows of the good things that have already come. No, he didn't say that. He said they are, that's present active. When he wrote in 62 AD, they are a shadow of the good things about to come. The Greek word mello in the infinitive. And the Blaster-Brunner Greek-English grammar says that mello in the infinitive indicates imminence. So those ceremonial feast days, or to express it another way, the bloody animal sacrifices, including the red heifer sacrifice, was still a type and a shadow of the good things that were about to come. Well, what did the red heifer sacrifice symbolize? Purification. Now, it's not identical to the atonement by any means, but it's certainly related to it. It was not Yom Kippur, but it carried with it that the necessity and the importance of atonement, purification. Do you get the point I'm making here, folks? You cannot argue on the one hand, as once again 99.9% of all dispensationalists agree, you cannot argue that the law of Moses was done away with, nailed to the cross, then turn right around and say, oh, well, we're just eagerly awaiting the offering of a red heifer sacrifice. Why are you looking for the offering of a red heifer sacrifice in obedience to Numbers chapter 19, which is the law of Moses? And look, I have read countless articles that were exuberant about the supposedly imminent offering of a red heifer sacrifice. And what did every single one of them do? They went right back to Numbers chapter 19. Do you see the problem here? This is a massive, insurmountable problem. If you are saying there has to be the offering of a red heifer sacrifice, ask yourself the question, why does it have to be? If you then appeal to Numbers chapter 19, then you are appealing to a law that you yourself believe is invalid, abrogated, removed, fulfilled. And thus to say, once again, that this is a humongous problem is an understatement of massive, massive proportions. Every time you hear somebody like John Hagee, every time you hear someone like Benny Hinn, every time you go on the YouTube and you see any of these videos talking about the red heifer, red heifer, red heifer, oh, it's supposed to be offered just any time now. and you hear them, you watch them, and they invariably appeal to Numbers chapter 19, ask yourself why they are appealing to a law that God himself took out of the way. And somebody says, well, he didn't take that law out of the way. Maybe. Maybe the red heifer law is still in force. Now, wait a minute. In Matthew chapter 5, 17 and 18, Jesus said, do not think that I am come to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy the law of the prophets. That's an elliptical context, ladies and gentlemen. And it's really important that you understand the force, the nature, the use of elliptical statements. And here's what I mean. I did not come to destroy the law or the prophets, but to fulfill. Well, he doesn't say verbatim law and prophets, but that's understood by that. That is precisely what he is saying. Do not think that I came to destroy the law of the prophets. I didn't come to destroy the law of the prophet and the prophets, but to fulfill the law and the prophets. For verily I say unto you, until heaven and earth passes away, not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the law and the prophets, until it is all, the law and the prophets, fulfilled. You see, ellipsis is being used to reduce the volume of words, the number of words. But the terminology of law and prophets applies to every single one of Jesus's uses of the term law. But notice what he says. Not one jot nor one tittle shall pass from the law or the prophets until it is all fulfilled. Now let's go back to what I said a few moments ago. And that is that 99.9% of all dispensationalists believe and teach that the law of Moses in its entirety has been done away. They even tell us it's been fulfilled and done away. Okay, let me express this in syllogistic form. All of the law has been fulfilled and removed, according to dispensationalism. But the law of Moses, mandated, prescribed the offering of the red heifer sacrifice. Therefore, the law prescribing, mandating, and commanding the red heifer sacrifice in Numbers chapter 19 has been fulfilled, has been taken out of the way, has been removed. Now, this raises a question, does it not? If the red heifer sacrifice law of Numbers 19 could not pass away until it was fulfilled, until what it typified and foreshadowed came to a reality, and if you say that the law of Moses has passed away, then what sacrifice could fulfill the red heifer typology of purification? Well, let's see. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. God, who at sundry times and in divers manners spake in time past by the prophets, has in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, by whom he has created all things, and all things were created through him. When he had by himself purged our sin, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. What did Jesus do? He purged sin. What was the red heifer sacrifice for? The purging of sin. See, this is the same book that says, if the ashes of a heifer purifies to the sanctifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Jesus Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot and without blemish, purge your conscience See, the red heifer sacrifice purified the flesh. It purified the defilement of the flesh. The blood of Christ purges our conscience from dead works so that we might serve the living God. So we have to ask that question one more time. Need to drive this home. If you believe that the law of Moses was fulfilled and therefore removed, how was it fulfilled? How was it removed? Well, Hebrews 9 tells us there in verse 12, 9 and 12, through the offering of his blood. That was the means of it. That was the power of it. Now, it had to be offered in the most holy place. And guess what? It had to be sprinkled on the people. And that's what Hebrews chapter 9 is all about, when Christ came out of the most holy place there to announce forgiveness, sanctification, purification for the waiting multitude. Folks, I hope you can see the power of what I'm trying to impress here. We're living in days in which over and over and over again, we have generation after generation, year after year, excitement and enthusiasm. Oh, they found a red heifer. Oh, they found 3 or 4 more. Oh, no, 5 more on their way to Jerusalem, even now. And yet they are disqualified for coloration, or they're disqualified because they grow too old. Many of the rabbis who were in charge of these 3 heifers that were left over after the first 2 were disqualified because of coloration, rabbis have expressed very serious concern that these red heifers are going to be disqualified because they're getting too old. So let me say again, it really doesn't matter. It really, honestly does not matter if they were to find a red heifer in Israel tomorrow that was perfect, not a white hair on it, not a black hair on it, and they were to offer that heifer as a sacrifice. Let's go back to a point I made earlier. Who is qualified to offer it? And once again, it's not enough to say, hey, I think I'm a Levite. Nope. That's not qualification. Even if you had some genealogies, which you don't, there are no genealogies. I hope you understand that. Since AD 70, ladies and gentlemen, there have been no genealogical records whereby any person on earth could prove that they are the lineage of Abraham. And somebody may jump up and say, no, wait a minute, Preston, family names, they passed on family names. Now, I understand that argument. I really do. But after the passing of 2,000 years, after marrying and intermarrying and intermarrying and intermarrying, are you going to tell me that there still exists today an absolutely pure bloodline of the Koheens? That argument is being made by some people. Is that verifiable? No, it's not. Well, my great-great-great-great-great-grandpa was. How do you know? And again, I actually understand. I do actually understand that argument. But it is an unprovable argument. And let's go back to Ezra chapter 2, 62 and 63. It was not an argument that would have stood up in the time of Ezra. when they had the genealogical records. No one has genealogical records today. Therefore, it's just somebody's word, which is not good enough. This is problematic. So to go back to what I started to say, even if, and again, letters this tall, that tall or more, even if they were to declare tomorrow they found a perfect red heifer, they do not have a qualified, purified high priest to offer it. They do not have a certified, purified altar. Folks, you see, the red heifer had to be offered outside the city gates at a very special location, on a very special altar. It wasn't offered inside the city. It wasn't offered in the temple plaza. It had to be offered outside the city gates. By the way, that's another allusion to Jesus' sacrifice. I hope you understand that. Hebrews chapter 13 tells us that Christ was offered without the gate, outside the gate. Well, that's not saying, as some people have, oh my goodness, pardon me. That is not saying, as some older commentator said, well, that just shows that he was ostracized, that he was cut off. Okay? That's not saying that at all. No. The red heifer sacrifice was always offered, Numbers chapter 19, offered outside the gate. There was a spot up on the Mount of Olives. You walked outside the gate, you walked across a bridge, and you went up a certain spot, and there was an altar. That's where the red heifer sacrifice was offered. Then it was burnt there, and the sacrifices were collected, then taken into the city where they were stored inside the temple. It was all an extremely elaborate ceremony. Well, guess what, folks? They don't have a red heifer sacrifice built outside the wall, up on the Mount of Olives. They certainly do not have the temple. Do you see how many pieces are missing here? Do you see that? And this is something that continually disturbs me about dispensationalism. And I've said this many, many times. Dispensationalism continues to kick the can down the road, or to put it another way, they keep changing the goalposts. They give us this narrative, this timeline. And they say, well, see, this has got to happen, this, and this. All of this got to happen in that certain order, you see. Well, some event, okay, here's the beginning of their narrative. Okay, here's the beginning of their timeline. And they've got an event way over here that supposedly follows this, and this. But this event happens. Like, see, this is proof positive we're in the last days. Wait a minute. What happened to the fulfillment of this, and this? So they move the goalpost. They move it from back here to over here. So are they tacitly admitting that, oh, well, our narrative, our timeline was actually wrong? Or are they saying it's God's narrative, God's timeline is really uncertain? Well, if God's timeline is uncertain, then you shouldn't be telling people we're in the last days and the following things are getting ready to happen in the following order. I mean, if God's timeline is uncertain, then you don't know it. So the point I'm making here is that when my dispensational friends say, well, we got to have this red heifer sacrifice, what they're forgetting or ignoring or discounting is, before you can ever get there, before you can ever have the red heifer sacrifice, You got to have the priesthood. You got to have the temple. You got to have the altar outside the gates. You don't have even one of those things present in Jerusalem today. Oh, look, I'm very familiar with the fact that we're constantly told YouTube videos, this and that and the other. I'm well aware of the fact that we're constantly told, oh, priesthood's ready. Utensils of the temple are ready. The altar is ready. But you see, that's supposedly a temple altar that belongs in the temple. Where's the red heifer sacrifice altar? Now, maybe I've missed this. All right. Maybe I have simply overlooked reference to the red heifer altar. Every article that I've read, every YouTube video that I've listened to, and again, maybe I just missed it. I mean, I really don't have time to sit down and to watch 30, 40, 50 videos a day trying to figure out every single thing that somebody's saying about the red heifer sacrifice and all of the accompanying accoutrements. I don't have time. So I try to pick out some of the people that some of the videos that have the most videos or most views, for instance, hoping and praying that, well, they are representative, that they sort of kind of know what they're talking about. And in none of those videos, none of the articles that I have read, none of them have gone so far as to say, guess what? The altar on the Mount of Olives is ready. Well, by the way, it wasn't just an altar. There was a pit out there as well. I won't go into those details. It's just simply in passing. There was a pit out there that was critical and a fundamental part of the entire ceremony of the red heifer sacrifice. None of those things, ladies and gentlemen, are ready or prepared. And let me say this again. When you start talking about the red heifer sacrifice, and I hate to sound so redundant, but you've absolutely got to catch the power of how circular the reasoning is in the dispensational world. They're getting ready to offer this red heifer sacrifice, but they don't have a qualified, purified high priest to do that. In order to have the red heifer sacrifice offered, they have to have a purified high priest, but in order to have a purified high priest, you have to have the sacrifice offered. You can't have this without this, but you can't have this without that. Oh, and you can't have the priest offer sacrifice without the altar out there, right? That altar's got to be purified by the ashes as well as the priest. Every single step, every single facet, every single tenet of the red heifer sacrifice was interconnected with each other, interwoven with each other, so that you can't have one without the other. And that means without the red heifer sacrifice, ashes, you have no Jerusalem temple, or at least you have no purified Jerusalem temple, and you have no qualified, certified, purified high priest. You have no red heifer sacrificial altar. It all starts with the red heifer commanded and mandated in Numbers chapter 19 of the law of Moses, which all of my dispensational friends agree and admit has been taken out of the way. Since the law of Moses has been taken out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, then any possibility of any validity whatsoever of any kind of a red heifer sacrifice simply goes up in smoke. It's pointless, it's meaningless, it's moot, and it's false. And I'm out of time. So next week, Daniel and I are going to pick up with some of the imagery found in the book of Ephesians, this temple imagery. We're going to compare it with all of this stuff I've talked about tonight about the red heifer sacrifice. In the meantime, I really hope and pray that you'll give very careful attention to the things that I've said tonight. Study it out. This is important stuff. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you on the flip side.